Hello and welcome back to Voyage of a Time Wanderer. Today I am here to do a review of Amsterdam, A History of the World's Most Liberal City by Russell Shorto. So today I wanted to talk about a recent 5-star nonfiction read, Amsterdam, The History of the World's Most Liberal City by Russell Shorto. I read this book as part of my Reading Through My Family Tree series, which is focusing on the Netherlands right now, and I have been really enjoying that focus. This book is in some ways almost a microhistory, as it focuses not just specifically on the history of the city of Amsterdam, but more precisely on the history and evolution of small L liberalism in the city. The author examines how tensions between economic and social liberalism have shaped Amsterdam since its founding, and how this has rippled out to affect the Netherlands as a whole and the world more broadly through the export of ideas to North America through the new Amsterdam colony, to the UK when the Dutch aristocrat William of Orange led the Glorious Revolution and became the King of Great Britain, and around the world through the imperial trading ambitions of the Dutch East India Company. He outlines how Amsterdam was unique in terms of long-term acceptance of religious and political differences, a lack of monarchy, and the collaboration of individuals to build and maintain private property through the massive water management projects. While other European countries were enforcing state religions, Amsterdam welcomed Protestant and Jewish refugees from other countries. And then when the Netherlands switched to Protestantism and the Dutch Reformed Church became the state church, they still allowed Catholics to continue worship practices discreetly, leading to churches disguised as canal houses, which are now museums, which I have visited when I visited the Netherlands. This concept of tolerance, primarily by looking the other way, is what the author argues is the basis of what made Amsterdam a uniquely liberal city. I was particularly fascinated by the discussion about the Dutch Golden Age inventing the idea of the home as a personal space, because Dutch society was more urban than many other European nations, and not as shaped by the powers of feudalism and strict class divisions. The famous canal houses of Amsterdam were occupied by all classes of people, and the richer residents did not have huge estates or houses that were outwardly more opulent than more middle-class residents. Since the houses were smaller, this also meant less servants, leading to more tight-knit family units that actually spent time together. So I'll read a quote that kind of illustrates what I was talking about the canal house being the initial conception of the modern view of home, and this is from chapter 5, The Liberal City. Each of these canal houses is an exquisite memorial to something so elemental to who we are that its significance might easily escape notice. For each of Amsterdam's canal houses was built to hold a family. Each represents what matters most to us. The idea of family was not born in the 17th century, but the concept of home as a personal, private, intimate space may have been. Where elsewhere there were big cities and countryside, the Dutch landscape was notable for being dotted with towns. The Dutch were urban. They were also going back into the Middle Ages and also having no doubt to do with the climate and conditions in which they lived, modest, thrifty, careful, and rather obsessed with household cleanliness, mopping floors and polishing silver and scrubbing stoops. The influx of wealth and the explosion of new ideas that came in the 17th century did not wipe out these traits, but rather solidified them. The modern canal house of the 17th century was meant, first of all, for everybody. The egalitarian nature of Dutch society translated into a sense that, while a richer person's surroundings might be somewhat fancier than someone else's, out-and-out opulence was in bad taste. A Nicolas Toop or a Rembrandt at his height might opt for a double-sized canal house, but compared with their counterparts in Paris or London, wealthy Amsterdammers lived modestly. They had few servants, and relations between servants and their employers didn't follow the lines of the class system in place elsewhere. Rich people from other parts of Europe expressed amazement to see, for example, that in the canal house of a wealthy Amsterdammer, the servant ate meals with the family. While in other European capitals through the Middle Ages, buildings were large, often taking up a city block, with a common courtyard and housed extended families along with servants and tenants, the Dutch kept things more intimate. Even wealthy households were small. The house contained the family and maybe 1 or 2 servants. This, as Rybensky argues, led the Dutch to pioneer in their canal-side dwellings a new concept, that of the home as consisting of a man, a woman, and their children. Paris's grandiosity is to Amsterdam's canal house cityscape what mythological figures are to ordinary people. Amsterdam relates to who we are today. It is, in a sense, where we began, we as a modern people who consider individual human beings to be more important than institutions. These sleepy canal-side streets with boats moored on one side and gabled brick houses on the other, this is the cradle of our focus on ourselves. It can't help but seem so charming to us. The least interesting section of this book for me was the final chapter or two of the book, which dealt with the history of Amsterdam post the Second World War and how some of the ideals of liberalism and tolerance, which in previous centuries had made it a refuge for political and religious refugees, evolved into the city's current reputation for legalized, or at least a policy of non-prosecution of things like prostitution and recreational drug use. He also ties in some of the more modern debates about what the limits of tolerance are or what they should be, using as examples the Nazi invasion and resistance to that, as well as current debates in the Netherlands around immigration. While it did help to explain some of the socio-political movements that have shaped modern-day Amsterdam, my interest really lies more deeply in history, so I enjoyed the first 3 quarters a lot more than the last quarter of the content of this book. But if you've ever been a tourist in Amsterdam, even these chapters will still have some interesting nuggets of information. My only critique really with this book is that it is very clearly written with an American audience in mind, and it frequently made comparisons to American figures and American events as a reference point for Dutch figures and Dutch events, i.e., so-and-so was the Dutch Abraham Lincoln, or these protests in the 14th century were on the scale of Vietnam War protests in the 1970s. It was a bit jarring, especially since the comparisons were frequently from very different time periods, and so didn't really have any actual relevance to the history of Amsterdam, besides providing American readers with a reference to the scale of events, or the severity of events, or the popularity of a public figure. Overall, though, I highly enjoyed this book. I listened to the audiobook, which was narrated by the author, and referenced this physical copy from my local library. One of the things I really liked about having the physical copy, even though I did really enjoy the audiobook experience, was it does have these beautiful maps. So in the front cover is an old map, and then in the back cover is a modern aerial photo of Amsterdam. And then it also has throughout some photo insets, starting from the founding of the city of Amsterdam, moving forward in time into the Dutch Golden Age. So it has some of the famous paintings and the actual site of where these paintings were made, and then moving all the way into the present day, talking about some of the various protests like John Lennon and Yoko Ono's famous bed-in. Some of these protests that have led Amsterdam to continue to have a reputation of, I guess, kind of being at the cutting edge of liberalism in the world. After having also read Dutch Light over January and February, which I found to be very interesting but definitely very academically dense, I was really surprised and delighted by how approachable and readable this account was, and how the author managed to weave some wonderful narrative nonfiction writing throughout the book. I would highly recommend this book to anyone with roots in the Netherlands, anyone interested in the Dutch Golden Age or 17th, 18th century European history in general, those who have traveled to Amsterdam or who would like to one day, and anyone who enjoys well-written, historically focused nonfiction. This book is very readable and approachable, and brought up some fascinating aspects of the influence of Dutch culture on the broader world that I had never considered before. The author has also written a book about the New Amsterdam colony that later became New York, and I recently ordered that from Thrift Books with some birthday money, so I'm definitely keen to pick that book up sometime in the future, probably when doing Reading Through My Family Tree series focused on the early American colonial era. So that's my review of Amsterdam, A History of the World's Most Liberal City by Russell Shorto. I definitely really enjoyed it, and I hope if any of you pick it up, you will really enjoy it as well. Thanks for watching, and until next time, enjoy wandering through the pages of a good book.